If your starter jar in your fridge is getting low and you're thinking, oh my goodness, I don't have enough to bake with, and if I use this to make some fed leaven or fed starter, I'm not gonna have any left over in the fridge. You're okay. Here is exactly how you're gonna continue to replenish the jar in your fridge, okay? First, you're going to take the portion out that you're gonna use to feed your starter. And I'm gonna show you exactly how I do that. Let's say it's 25 grams. That's all we need to take out. So we take out our 25 grams, we feed our starter, then our starter wakes up. It's happy, happy, happy. Now this was a whole lot more than 25 grams that I fed because I'm making a big batch of pizza dough. But now I have my fed and happy leaven. This is the starter that lived in the fridge that I fed, and now it is all ready to bake with. But this is more than I actually need. So everything that is extra, everything that's over the amount that I need to make for my recipe is actually what they call discard. Not because I'm gonna throw it away, but because it's the excess from my recipe, and guess what? That is what you want, because now it goes back into the jar that lives in my fridge. I give it a little stir, and this actually does a couple different things for the starter in the fridge. Number one, we're replenishing our supply. It's the easiest way for you to replenish. Bake something. Wake up more starter than you need, put some back in, you just have replenished your supply. Yes, you can put the discard from what you fed back into the jar of your main starter that lives in your fridge. The second thing that it does for this jar of starter is it actually feeds it. You just gave it a fresh amount of flour and water, but you didn't waste anything because it was gonna be extra anyways, and now we get to keep it, and it replenished this jar, and it gave it a little revival. It fed it a little bit. So if there was any hooch on the top of this jar, that would be telling us that the starter has gone dormant. It's totally fine, nothing's wrong with it. I put my extra back in, I stir it up, and it's gonna help to feed all of that happy sourdough starter that was in your jar. Then this jar, the lid goes gently on the top, and I'm gonna stick it back into the fridge, and then it's ready for me to bake with another day. And it's probably gonna be a couple weeks because I'm gonna go on vacation. If you are trying to leave on vacation and you're thinking, I don't know what to do with my starter, how do I keep it alive while I'm gone? I'm gonna put that video next. You'll get to watch that on how to keep your starter alive while you go on vacation. And then when you come back, let's wake up your starter together and we'll bake a loaf of bread, whether you want to make the rustic loaf or make one of the easiest ones like focaccia bread or a sandwich loaf. That's when you come back from vacation, you'll wake your starter back up and we will bake again. But we're so glad you're here in the kitchen with us. Let's dive into more starter fun. You're leaving on vacation, but you're thinking, oh my goodness, I'm trapped here. I can't leave my sourdough starter. Who's gonna take care of it? What's gonna happen while I'm gone? Okay. Good news, you can go on vacation. It's gonna be just fine. Here's what you need to do. First, I want you to think about how old your sourdough starter is. If your starter is less than 6 months old, maybe you just made it in the last few weeks or a month, I want you to get a clean quart-sized jar, put it on your scale, zero your scale out or tear it, and then I want you to pour your starter into this fresh jar so you can see how much starter do you have. In our example here, we have 30 grams of starter. Then, whatever the weight is of your starter, maybe it's 40 or 50 or 60 grams, you are gonna feed your starter the same amount of water and the same amount of flour. So since our starter is 30 grams, I'm gonna give it 30 grams of water, and then I tear the scale out because when you tear the scale out, it zeroes out any weight that it already has. And in this instance, it would be pretty easy to add 30 plus 30, but because I just honestly don't wanna deal with adding, I mix the water up in there, tear the scale out, and then we're gonna put in 30 grams of flour. So if you have 50 grams of starter, you're gonna do 50 grams of water, 50 grams of flour, get that mixed up, and then you're gonna let this sit in a spot that is warm. You want it to be in a spot where it's about 70 degrees, and you're going to let this starter get as active as it possibly can. Hopefully it's gonna double in size. When it hits that highest rise point, that is when you are going to gently put the lid on. Now it's at its highest rise, and you're going to put it into your fridge. It is going to be fine in there as you go on vacation. While you're gone on vacation, your starter is going to sink. It is probably going to get a little bit watery and thinner, and it's just fine. I'll show you how to wake it up once you get back. So come and hang out with me again. When you get back from your vacation, we'll wake your starter up. Now, what if you've been baking with your starter for a really long time and you replenish it on a weekly basis or every couple weeks as you make starter? Like this is more fed starter or leaven than I'm actually gonna need for the recipe that I'm making. And so I literally just take out whatever part I'm not gonna need, and it goes into the jar that lives in the fridge. I give it a little stir. That little bit of fed leaven keeps my starter in the fridge super happy. And as you saw, there wasn't even any hooch on it. I have been baking pretty consistently though for the last month-ish, but I'm headed out on vacation. We're gonna go enjoy summertime, and I don't wanna have to worry about any sourdough starter. Here's the good news. If your starter is mature, it's more than 6 months old, if you've baked with it on a regular basis, all you have to do is gently leave the lid on and keep it in your fridge. It's gonna pause your sourdough starter. It's gonna make it go dormant. Now, when you come back from vacation, depending on how long you were gone, it's very, very likely that you're gonna have a little bit of hooch on the top of your starter, or liquid. That liquid is called hooch. There's nothing wrong with it. What it's telling you is that your starter went to sleep. And the more hooch and the darker the hooch is on top of your starter, the more feedings it's gonna need in order to get it fully awake and active and ready to bake with. I've got lots of videos to help you with that, and I'm gonna put the link to one of them below. So if your starter has been asleep for a while, go click on that link. It'll show you how to wake it up. But if you today are just thinking, I just want to go on vacation and not worry about my starter, I want to put your mind at ease. It's going to be fine in the fridge. Remember, if it's young, it's a baby starter, feed it, let it get to its highest rise, put it into the fridge. If you've been baking with your starter a lot, you don't need to do anything. It's fine. Put it in the fridge. It's gonna wait for you until you get home. Then when you get home and you're ready to begin baking again, come hang out with me. I'll show you how to wake your starter up. And hey, right now, you wanna bake something? Keep on watching. I'll show you how to feed your starter, how to know it's ready to bake with. There's 4 easy ways to know. How to mix up a batch of dough, and then we'll actually make a sandwich loaf, but then I'll put this link down there as well if you want to make a rustic loaf. Come and bake with me. I'm so glad you're here in the kitchen with me. Let's talk all about your sourdough starter. Let's talk about the ways to know that it's ready for you to make dough with it, and also a good way to figure out the best timing, because we've been getting lots of questions. Number 1 on how do I know if my starter is ready? But number 2, so many questions from you saying, my starter rose and it did really good, but then when I went to go mix up my dough, it had deflated. What did I do wrong? So let's dive into all of that. Let's talk about that, because this is all about timing. And once you learn the timing for your kitchen and your climate, you are gonna feel like you hit the jackpot, because your starter is gonna wake up for you every time. It's gonna rise, and it's gonna be at its highest point when you're ready to make your dough. And that's the trick, is you want this to be at the highest point when you go to make your dough, because if it has started to deflate, then it means it needs to be fed again. So let's dive into all of that. We're gonna go and feed the starter. We're gonna get it so it's like this, nice and bubbly and ready for you to bake with. If you wanna stick around to the end of the video, you can not only just feed your starter, but mix up a batch of dough with me, and we'll even bake a loaf of bread together. And I'm gonna have us do the easiest loaf to make together, which is sandwich bread, because it doesn't take as much shaping, and that's where I'm gonna encourage you to start. But now, let's dive in to all the things about your starter. When it comes to your sourdough starter, here's the first thing that I want you to think about. How old is your starter? Did you just start it from scratch and it's very immature, very young? Or have you had this starter for a long time and you've been working with it for a while and you're just trying to figure out how to get a good rhythm? The reason why the maturity of your starter matters is because an older starter will just be stronger and it will be easier to wake up. If you keep your starter in the fridge, like I do, when I don't use it for several weeks, it forms hooch on the top. It gets liquid onto the top. What I do is I just stir it in. Don't pour off that hooch. And there's a whole nother video all about that. I'll put the link to that below. But stir the hooch in. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to take out a portion of that starter from your fridge, and we're going to add it into, I like to use a quart-sized jar, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a really big batch of starter because I'm making a big batch of dough. If you are not wanting to make a huge batch of dough, you don't have to feed the same amount of starter that I'm feeding, but I'm going to encourage you to do the same ratios. And for this very first feeding, we are going to do a 1:1:1 ratio. And the reason why we're going to do that is because if your starter is very young, or you have not been working with it very much and it's dormant, it needs to have a smaller ratio of all of the elements so that it can have the most energy to wake up. So what that means is if I put 30 grams of starter into my jar, I'm going to put 30 grams of water, and I'm also going to put 30 grams of flour. What I like to do is I put the starter into the jar first, add the water, mix it up so that gets mixed up before we add the flour in. When you are feeding your starter, it's not super important that it be completely lump free and really, really smooth, but I just like having it be incorporated a little bit. It's just a little bit easier to incorporate the flour into it if you mix the water into the original starter first. And as you can see, what I do when I add the ingredients is I actually tear the scale in between the ingredients, because it's easier to see if, oops, I put way too much of water in, or I put way too much flour in. And I know lots of people, they love to comment and say, I don't use a scale, my grandma didn't use a scale, and that's amazing. If you are to the point that you don't need to use a scale, you probably also don't need this video, and so bravo, go bake on. But as you are beginning your sourdough journey, I encourage you to get a scale so that you can know if you're putting the same ratios in. The ratio of like how much starter weighs, how much water weighs, how much flour weighs, you can't go by volume, which means you can't just put half a cup of each in. It's really good to use the scale. That helps you get a really good gauge. Once you get all of those elements in there, remember this very first feeding, we're going to do 1:1:1. So if you only want to do a very small amount of fed starter, do 10 grams of starter, 10 grams of water, 10 grams of flour, and get that really mixed up. And then what we're going to do is we are just going to gently set our lid on. I mean, you can slam it on, that's fine, but you don't want to close this container. You want the natural gases that your sourdough is creating, you want those to be able to escape from that jar. If you screw the lid on really tight, you are going to create a starter bomb. you do not want to have a starter bomb in your kitchen, especially once your starter gets active and happy. It is going to grow and multiply really, really fast. So my original jar of starter is going to go back into the fridge, and this new jar, fresh jar that we fed, my lid is just sitting gently on the top, and it is going to sit in the kitchen for 4 hours. In 4 hours, we're going to come back and check it. I want to show you what the starter looks like that I have that lives in the fridge. I want you to see the consistency of it. This is really, really normal consistency for a starter that is dormant or that you have not been working with very much. Or if your starter is very, very young. If it's not mature and very strong, it's normal for it to look a bit liquidy and limp. We're going to just call it limp. It's not fluffy. It doesn't have air bubbles in it. And I can almost just pour it straight out of the jar. This starter lives in the fridge. When I go to bake, I take a portion of the starter out of this jar and put it into a nice clean jar. What we just did. We just did that process together. Then you'll see later in this video, I'll show you, we're going to take a portion of our fed starter, which is called levain, and we're going to put it back into this fridge jar. And that's the only way that this fridge jar gets refreshed, revived, and refed. I don't ever put more water and more flour directly into this jar because it doesn't need it. It's dormant and it sits in the fridge until I'm ready to bake again. I have another video that dives even more into all of the things about starter, and I'm going to put that link below as well. Now, are you ready to see what the starter looks like after 4 hours? Remember, we did a 1:1:1 ratio, which means that it had a lot of food to get growing because the amount of starter that we started with was the same amount as the amount of flour we put in. So look at how it already is fluffed up. It's not as liquidy as it was when we started. So this is what yours should look like. It should be similar to this after just 4 hours. It should be getting thicker and it has a little bit of bubbles in it. If yours doesn't look like this right now and it looks liquidy still, then what I want you to do is take out some of your starter. Here's how you figure out how much to take out. Set your jar on your scale and zero it out, and then you are going to remove starter from it until you get to 30 grams, because then you know you took out 30 grams of starter. Now I'm going to put in more than 60 grams. And the reason that I'm going to do some different ratios for my second feeding is I love to do a 1:4:4 ratio when I'm making a starter that I'm going to bake with. And the reason why I like to do these ratios for my second feeding is because I want my starter to actually grow slower. And the reason why I like it to grow slower is because I love to make big batches of dough and put them in the fridge, and then I can work with that dough whenever I want. When you do bigger ratios, when you're feeding your starter, it makes your dough and your starter rise slower, which gives you more time to work with it, and it doesn't overproof as fast. And so that's why I like doing these bigger ratios when I'm going to make a batch of dough that is going to sit in the fridge for multiple days. So I knew that I had 60 grams of starter to begin with in my jar because we took out 30 grams. So I'm doing 240 grams of water, which is 4 times what I started with. And then I'm going to do 240 grams of flour. So I'll do another video soon that's all about math, how you figure this out, but I know you can do it. Whatever you start with, you just times it times 4, and that gives you the 1:4:4 ratio. So let's do it with 10. If you started with 10 grams of starter, you would do 40 grams of water, 40 grams of flour. But I don't want you to do these bigger ratios until your starter is waking up. If you're still back at my starter is liquidy still, you still need to stick to the 1:1:1 ratio because your starter needs more flour and more water to help it to get stronger. The other thing that you can do is to switch from using an all-purpose bread flour to a whole wheat flour or a rye flour when you're feeding your starter. The whole wheat and rye flours are so rich in nutrients that it actually helps to strengthen your starter. And I have a video about that as well. I will put that link below. If you're still struggling with a floppy, weak, watery starter, go get some whole wheat flour or rye flour and work with that for just a little bit. You don't have to make your dough with that flour, but I want you to feed your starter with that flour. Here's the schedule that I like to do when I do these 2 feedings to get my starter ready to bake with. I do the first feeding in the afternoon around 1 or 2 o'clock. That feeding rests for 4-ish hours. And then I do my second feeding, and I like to do that one after dinner time. So it's like 7 p.m., 8 p.m.-ish. It's summertime right now, so it's still light outside. But this is the same schedule that I do in the winter time. But just know that when it's summer and it's warm, your starter is going to activate faster. Even though these are the big ratios, it's still going to activate faster than it would in the winter time. So my starter jar, my lid is on loosely. The lid is on loosely for both of them. The little jar is my fridge jar. That one's going to go back into the fridge. This jar, though, now you can see it's half full of all of our starter ingredients, and it is going to rest on the counter overnight. I'm putting the whole schedule that I do down in the description below as well, but it takes about 12 hours for it to activate, and boom, there you go. The next day it has filled the jar. But I know that this starter can reach a little tiny bit higher, so I'm gonna let it go. I let it go for another hour or so. But look this is the first sign that you're like, my starter is ready to bake with. It has doubled in size and it has lots of bubbles in it. Those bubbles are important because it means that it has fluffed up. Look at this nice texture. It's webby, it's thick, there's bubbles in it, which means it's aerated, and if you put a little drop of it in a cup of water, it will float. The reason why the float test is a great one to do is because it's telling you that your starter is strong enough to create that gas, which creates the bubbles, which aerates your dough, which gives it fluff and great texture. And that's where you want it to be when you're going to go and bake. So these are the things you're looking for. Number 1, your starter has doubled in size. Number 2, there's lots of bubbles in it. Number 3, it's a thicker, webby texture. Number 4, when you put a blob of it in water, it will float. And then we're going to mix up our dough. So I want you to come and mix up your dough with me, but check that starter. If it is not doing all of those things, if it doesn't have this nice webby texture and it doesn't float in the water, I want you to go back to that first feeding and do another 1:1:1 ratio and keep working on the maturity and the strength of your starter. If your starter passed the float test, yay! Let's make a batch of bread together. And this batch of bread, the recipe's down in the description below. This batch of dough is actually going to make
now look at
enough
this
bread
great texture
to do
of the
2
starter.
rustic
It's
loaves
not going to be
or
as thick
2
as it would be if you did a
sandwich
1:1:1 ratio, because we have some different ratios going on there, but it should be webby and fluffy. And see how it is almost like it wants to stick to each other. That's a great texture to start with. And for this batch of dough, we only need 300 grams of starter, which means I have extra starter or extra leaven. This right here, this fed starter, see that? That's called leaven. But I don't need all of this leaven for my recipe. So now everything that is in that jar is actually now discard. Not because I'm going to discard it and throw it away, but because I don't need it for this recipe, it's extra. It's the extra leftover fed starter or extra leaven, and I'm actually going to put that back into my fridge jar, and I'm going to save it to make sourdough discard waffles, or I'm going to use it when I make another batch of fed starter to bake some bread with. Or let's see, maybe I'll make a batch of our sourdough discard molasses crinkles. But don't get rid of that. That is happy, happy starter. In between adding my ingredients, I always tare the scale, just like I did when I am feeding the starter, because then you don't have to add up any ingredients and you can see right when you hit whatever the recipe is that you're following. And for this batch of bread dough, we need 600 grams of water. If you make this recipe and you find that your dough is way too sticky to work with, I want you to add in some extra flour until you can get it workable, but make a note for yourself so that next time you make this recipe, omit 50 to 100 grams of water and see how your dough is coming together. Your climate, the elevation you live at, where you live, the humidity in your house, the humidity of your fridge, all of that plays into how your dough comes together. And I give you permission to play with the amount of water that you're using. You can add more flour in if your dough is too sticky. Add more flour. I don't want you to feel stuck with this dough that you can't work with. This is the fun of working with sourdough, is that you get to learn, oh, I can't work with it. I need to add a little bit more flour, or I'm going to do less water next time. And I'm going to help you get to that point. Now, I like to use this all-purpose organic unbleached flour. The reason why I love using it is because I can buy it in bulk for a really great price. And so this is what I make the majority of our breads with. And if you are here in our Pacific Northwest area, I find this at Costco. And for this recipe, we need 900 grams. And as you can see, whoops, I went over a little bit. Not a big deal because my scale was tared out or zeroed out. It's super easy to see that I went over that mark a bit. Just take out what you don't need in there. And I love to use these Danish dough whisks to get my dough mixed together. I do have a video. If you want to use your countertop stand mixer, that works amazing as well. I'll put that link below so that you can go and find that video too. But use the Danish dough whisk. It's amazing if you don't have a stand mixer that you want to use. And my goal right now is to simply get it so that everything is pretty well incorporated. It's still going to look a bit lumpy and clumpy, and that is totally fine. This is one of the things about sourdough that is so magical. The more time that you allow that dough to sit and rest together, the more time the flour and gluten has to absorb the moisture and begin to break down, because your sourdough starter is now working its way all the way through the dough, and it is having a feast on all of this flour. And as it feasts on the flour, it's creating that natural yeast that allows the dough to rise. So here's the thing with sourdough. Trying to speed up the mixing or over mixing it actually makes your dough gummy. It doesn't help it. So this is great because you do not have to get this dough really soft like a baby's bottom. It's going to get there on its own. Our goal is to simply get the water and the flour combined with that starter, and then we're going to let the starter do the work. So here's another thing that is so cool. When you do this initial mix, you noticed I didn't put any salt into the dough. You get the dough completely mixed together first, and then I put the bowl back onto the scale, and we're gonna shake 20-ish grams over the top. I like to use this, it's pretty fine, but it's a Himalayan salt. You can use any salt that you want, but here's the thing, not all salt is the same. So start with 20 grams of salt and see how the flavor is for you. If you want it a little saltier, bump it up next time. If you find that your salt is saltier, use a little bit less. You have permission to adjust it, but you do not have permission to add the salt into the dough until it can rest together. And as you can see, I ran out of Himalayan salt. I had to go grab my regular table salt, boo, but it's still gonna taste delicious. Here's what we're doing though. We're putting the salt on the top of the dough, and we're gonna cover this dough with, we're gonna cover the bowl with our towel, and this is now going to go into the autolyse stage where it is just going to rest for at least 30 minutes. And we'll be back in around 30 minutes. Maybe it's going to be 45. I don't know. But it needs to rest for at least 30 minutes, and we want to come back and get that salt incorporated and start our stretch and folds in no more than an hour, okay? So we're going to set our timer for 30 minutes and have that be our goal to come back and incorporate this salt and do our very first stretch and fold. While our timer's going for the autolyse stage, we're going to get our discard, that extra fed starter, and we're going to put it back into the starter jar that lives in the fridge. Now, here's what we're going to do. We're going to mix it together. They now get to combine, and this fed starter is now going to revive and kind of refresh the starter that lives in your fridge. This is how you keep that starter from being completely depleted. You always are going to put just a little bit of your fed starter from when you're baking back into your fridge jar, and that's how you don't run out. If you feel like your jar is getting really low, do an extra big batch of feeding your starter, or do a couple feedings to like build it up, and then put some of that back into your fridge jar so that you don't deplete that jar completely. Then this jar is now ready either for us to make a recipe that calls for sourdough discard. You can take it straight out of this jar and you're ready to go. Or this jar now is what we will use when we want to make our next batch of pizza dough, or I'm going to make a babka, or I'm going to make another bread that I need to have some fed starter. I'm going to take some out of this jar. Now that our dough has rested for 30 minutes, that salt is sitting on the top, and it's really normal to see a little bit of moisture that has collected right around where that salt is. So don't be worried if you see that. I like to get a little bit of water on my hands first. Having water on your hands helps because then the dough isn't as likely to stick to your hands. And here's this really cool thing, and this is why you wait to put salt into the dough until after it has had a chance to rest for a while, because salt actually stops or inhibits the flour from fully hydrating. And so when we allow it to rest for 30 minutes before we mix the salt in, we get better flavor, better texture, and better hydration. And look, the dough already looks so much better than when we first mixed it up. We're going to just keep working our way around the bowl. I push my hand down under the dough, pull it up, and flip it over onto the next part. And that is our first stretch and fold. So I'm going to rinse my hands off real quick, grab the towel, and we're going to cover our bowl up and set the timer for 30 minutes. It's time for stretch and fold number 2. I just went and got a little bit of water on my hands. I'm doing the same thing, pulling it up. I'm going to work my way around the bowl. You're going to see, this is going to take maybe 5 minutes if you include washing your hands before and after. Then, so look, when you get your hands wet, it barely sticks to your hands. If yours is really, really sticky, everybody's house is different. And so the next time that you make this, what I want you to do is actually use just a little bit less water and see. The other thing is, if yours is really, really sticky, you might be over mixing it. So just remember, the sourdough itself is going to do all the work of working its way through the dough. You're just helping a little bit by stretching and folding. Okay, now set your timer. We'll be back for stretch and fold number 3 in a little bit. Stretch and fold number 3. Get my hands wet.
stretch, and fold. Give it a wiggle, and I'll show you the bowl because I just want you to see that there is some dough remains still stuck on the sides of the bowl, but look at the dough is becoming softer. There's not as many lumps in it. That's because the sourdough is working its magic. It's working its way through the bowl. So this is the last one. Back to answering emails while the sourdough rests, and then I'll show you how I put it in the fridge. We're on our final stretch and fold, and as I stretch and fold it, I'm going to put it into the bin. This is the bin that I love to put my pizza dough in, my bread dough, because this is for a big batch, and then I just take out what I need for whatever I'm gonna make. So first, get my hands wet. I already washed them. I'm gonna stretch and fold, and you're gonna find that as you get to this last stretch and fold, the dough is going to be even softer. You don't need to do anything in your bin. No oil, flour, nothing like that. Remember, the goal is that we don't add any more flour into this. We want it to only have that flour that was in there initially. And so into the bin, we mixed up that big batch of dough, put it in our tote, and then it can go into the fridge. But I get lots of questions on, well, once I make this big batch of dough, can I make a loaf of bread that same day? Yes, you can. Keep watching. I'm gonna show you how to shape it, get it shaped, get it into that loaf pan, let it proof, bake it. So you can use this dough the exact same day. The other thing I get lots of questions about is, there are a lot of recipes that call you to bulk ferment your dough, and most people do that on their counter. I don't do that, and here's why. Because lots of people overproof their dough that way, and my whole goal is to be able to make a big batch of dough, put it in the fridge, and then be able to bake bread any day that I want. I don't want to have to be mixing up the sourdough, dealing with the starter, dealing with mixing up dough all the time. That doesn't fit our life schedule. So the way that we do it is the dough gets mixed up. Most weeks I don't bake anything that day. I'm literally just getting the dough made that day. So I break it up into chunks that fit into our life and schedule. And this tote stays in our fridge. We almost always have a tote like this in our garage fridge with some kind of dough in it. This is our regular bread dough, and I want to show you what it looks like while it's in the fridge, because when it goes into the fridge, it is doing its own bulk ferment, but it's going very slow, much slower than if it's sitting out at room temperature. And do you see that? Look at those bubbles. That means it's so happy. And if you have been a subscriber for very long, you saw I posted, depends on when you watch this video, but sometimes I put these into the fridge and I try to put too much dough in them. And yes, your dough will continue to rise. It will bubble. It's growing. This is like a huge sourdough starter. That's what we made, right? We just fed our starter and it's growing. So sometimes it will bust out of this container. It happens, even to me. I always try to put too much in because I don't want it to take up so much space. But yes, this dough bulk ferments in your fridge. All of that to say that. So, are you ready? Would you like to make a loaf of sandwich bread together? Just keep on watching and I'll show you. We'll walk through all the steps. So we're gonna take this dough that has been living in the fridge for a number of days. I leave it in the fridge for up to 2 weeks. I pull chunks of dough out and make all sorts of stuff. Focaccia bread, rolls, sandwich loaves, the rustic loaves with our banneton basket. That's what we use this dough for. I have a different recipe for pizza dough, and the reason why I do a different one is because I need the pizza dough to be a little bit stronger so that I can work with it and we can slide it into our pizza oven. And I will put the link to that video below as well. But honestly, follow or subscribe to our sourdough playlist, subscribe to our channel, then anytime that I post something, you'll be the first to be notified. But if you go into the sourdough playlist, you can see all of the videos that explain all these different things. And we're just so glad that you're here baking with us. So now let's go make a loaf of sandwich bread with the dough that we mixed up from your super happy. We're making fresh sourdough sandwich bread today, and I'm gonna show you the absolute easiest way. If you've watched my other video on how I batch out dough, this is the dough that I made about a week ago with my sourdough starter. I'll put the link below to that whole recipe and the process of how to make it, how to wake up your starter, all of that. It's down in the description below, so you can click on over to that video. But here's the cool thing. I made this dough, woke up my starter, did all of that work a week ago. The dough sits in the fridge until I have time to bake. And today we are going to use the cast iron loaf pan, and I'm gonna show you how I make a loaf of bread in it. Here's the awesome thing. If you have been struggling to get the rustic loaf to turn out right, and you're like just having a hard time with it, get one of these loaf pans, and I want to encourage you to make a few batches of sandwich bread because it's so easy. You're gonna have success, which is gonna give you like the courage to go back to that rustic loaf if you want to. Our family absolutely loves the sourdough loaves because they're really easy to cut. I bake it in such a way that the crust isn't super crunchy, so it makes really great sandwich bread, great toast, which if you need one of these containers, I also put this link down below in the description. Just click where it says more and it will expand, and there's all sorts of great links and everything down there. And okay, look at this. Do you see? Look at all of those bubbles in there. That right there is happy, happy dough. And we're gonna be able to make the yummiest sandwich bread. My dough is cold, straight out of the fridge. I have my scale here because I set my container on the scale and I'm wanting to take out, which I use my knife just so I can kind of score the dough and not push too much air out of it. I score the dough because I want to take out 800 grams worth of dough. And so I'm looking at the scale and essentially subtracting from the amount that is on here. Write down on the lid of your container the weight of the container so that when you put it on the scale, you subtract the weight of the container, which is around 300 and something grams. So I subtract that and then I take out what would equal 800 grams, which we are about there. Okay, now this dough is going back into the fridge, and I have enough to make either a batch of focaccia bread or another loaf of sandwich bread, or if I wanted, I could use the rest of that dough in there to make another rustic loaf. It's so versatile, which is why I love the recipe, and I also really, really love only needing to make a batch of dough once a week, and then we can have fresh bread all throughout the week. And I actually have, if my timer goes off, it's because I have a big batch of our pizza dough going right now too. And that is a whole nother video. That link is in the description below. So much in the description below. So if you want to dive into more sourdough fun with us, head on down there. Before we shape the loaf though, your pan, this is the one part that's different than if you were gonna make a rustic loaf in your big Dutch oven. You're not gonna put any parchment paper in here. Instead, what I do is I just drizzle a little bit of olive oil in, and I use my hands and I rub it all over the pan. It's not gonna bother your dough that you have a little bit of olive oil on your hands. When you wash your cast iron pan after it is used, don't use any soap. Soap leaches into the cast iron and it will actually, eventually it would start giving your loaves of bread kind of a soapy flavor. I just run it under really hot water if there was a little bit of the crust stuck to it. And then as soon as you're done scrubbing it, Then what you do is you dry it off really good because you don't want to have any moisture on there. The moisture is what causes the rust on the cast iron. And then once you've dried it off, then I actually oil it right away so that it just helps it to stay nice, and I guess it hydrates it or protects it. I don't know, but the cast iron loves olive oil, loves oil on it. So it already had a little bit of oil in there, but now I'm just making sure that that little bit that I drizzled in is rubbed all over the pan. What I found in the first batches when I first started using this pan is that if I didn't get enough oil into those corners, like one little bit of the dough might stick, because the dough is actually going to rest in here before it bakes. So this is why it's so much easier, because it doesn't have to like rest on the counter, rest in a basket, get transferred. We're gonna shape this and it's gonna rest right in here. So I'm gonna bring you over here now so you can see how we shape it. Here is what I try to keep in mind, is I want my loaf to be about this length. It's gonna fill out as it rises in the oven, but as we shape it, we want to kind of keep that length in mind. So I'll just keep it right up there. And here's the thing with sourdough, don't be shy to shape it. So I did one roll. Now I am gonna do that again. I'm gonna roll it again, and I'm being really firm with it so that it stays together. And then I'm gonna do it one last time. One more roll, really, really firm, getting it rolled, rolled, rolled. And if it's feeling like it's not even, squeeze it out. The more tension that you create for your loaf, the better the rise is gonna be. So now let's bring this over here, and you can see that it's still a little bit, I'm like, I don't like how it's shaped. So I'm actually gonna roll it again. And it's okay, now there's a little bit of olive oil on it, but now, oh yeah, I like this. Keep rolling it until you get it so that it really is gonna fill up that pan pretty well. Okay, see how that fills the pan up pretty well? There's a little bit of space on the ends. That's totally fine. Now that your dough is all shaped, it's in your pan, you have two options. One, the first option, which is what I'm gonna do, is I'm gonna put a piece of parchment over it just so nothing floats into the loaf while it's resting. And my loaf is actually gonna rest here on the counter for about an hour, and then I'm gonna pop it in the oven. I'm gonna bake it today. But what if I had time to shape it, but I don't really have time to let it rest and bake? You can shape it, put it into your loaf pan, cover it with plastic wrap so it's sealed really tight, and pop it back into your fridge, and it will proof and rest in there. And then whenever you're ready to bake, you can take it straight out of the fridge and it can go straight into the oven. So this is gonna rest. I got some other work to do out in the garden, and I'll be back in an hour and we'll pop this into the oven. The bread's been resting on the counter for an hour, and so now I'm preheating the oven to 425. And here's the trick with using those loaf pans, because if you've done other sourdough stuff, you know that you're trying to create some steam in the oven, which helps the bread to bake better. While your oven is preheating, put a metal pan. Don't use glass, use metal. Set that down in the bottom rack. Put the pan in first, and then I like to use my watering can, and I pour the water into the pan, and I fill it up as much as possible because it's gonna evaporate off a whole lot of steam as it's baking. But put the water in after the pan is in the oven, unless you want to spill water on your floor and mop. But I put it in now so that as the oven is preheating, it begins to create steam in the oven. And this is how you can bake with a loaf pan and not have to have a lid, because it's tricky to like try to put another loaf pan on top. And honestly, I didn't want to have another lid that I had to keep track of, and so I just went with the loaf pan with no lid. There are loaf pans with lids. If you want to use one of those, you can, but this system works. I take my blade and I do one slice And this dough is getting a little sticky, so I'm so curious to see how it bakes up. But if yours is sticking like that, just make sure that your slice is real deep. Sometimes I have to slice it a couple times, real deep. And now we're gonna pop this baby in the oven. Our water is steamy in there. I'm gonna set the timer for 20 minutes. It takes about 35 minutes for the loaf to bake completely, but I like to check in 20 minutes that there's still water in that pan. If the water evaporates out of your pan, it's gonna start to ruin your metal pan. The pans aren't meant to be in the oven with nothing in them. So check at 20 minutes that there's still water in your pan, and then we'll reset the timer. So here's what the bread looks like at 35 minutes. 35 minutes in our oven. So you can see it's looking pretty good. It has a little bit of the golden toastiness to it, but I want it to go a bit more. I like to check it at 35 minutes though, just to ensure that it's not getting too dark. I'm gonna set the timer for another 10 minutes. The bread is officially done. Okay, check that out. It has a little bit of that more golden color. It still has some light color to it. And this is what we've decided we really like. But here is the cool thing. You get to decide, how crispy do you want the top? Do you want it softer? If you like a crispier crust, you can actually take that water pan out halfway through at that 20-minute mark and then just let it continue baking without it. We like it to be just a little bit softer so it's easier to like eat the sandwich and it's not like cutting up the top of your mouth. Okay, so now what we do is we have to wait. We have to be patient. This is gonna rest in the pan for about an hour, and then I'll bring you back when I take it out of the pan and we'll do a slice so that you can see what it looks like. The final test. We gotta cut it. You gotta see what it looks like. I use this, it's like a frosting knife, it's plastic, just to go around the loaf and release it so that if it got stuck a little bit to the side, it won't stay. And then I kind of bang it a little bit. Ooh, this one came out very easy. And now take a look at the bread. It has a nice bottom. It's not hard though, which is awesome. The top, listen, even the top isn't crazy hard, but this is where you get to decide how crunchy you want your crust. Everybody's oven bakes different. And so take the baking time and feel the freedom to adjust it. If you get into the middle of yours and it still is just a little bit sticky or tacky, then I would say bake it for an extra 5 minutes. I like leaving the loaf in the pan to cool because it just kind of helps finish the baking. So let's cut into this. This is one of our favorite bread knives. I'll put the link below. Okay, look at this nice sandwich bread. And you know, this piece is gonna be a little bit smaller than when we get up here, but I don't think anybody's gonna complain about eating it. So let's cut a few more slices. And if you have questions or thoughts or you're confused about something, just leave a comment below. We love your questions. It is so helpful because then when I go to take the sourdough out and bake again, then I already have in my mind, oh, I want to talk about that. So here we go. One final look. Look at that delicious sandwich bread. All from that same big bulk recipe. I know you can do it too while you're gardening or answering emails or whatever it is that you're working on. And okay, isn't this interesting? Remember how many times I rolled it? There's no spiral in there, which is kind of cool. So the next loaf, I have a request to put like some cinnamon and sugar in it. I'll let you know if I do that. But happy baking, friends. We're so glad you're here in the kitchen with us.